Folks, after that absolutely amazing, thought-provoking discussion, which I'm sure a lot of people will want to see it again, we are now on to the privacy panel, and this is going to be very, very interesting because we have Derek Lackey on the top left, my partner in crime. Has been an amazing help, and by the way, it is Derek's birthday today, so
happy birthday
from all of us.
Thanks,
very happy birthday, and he's been doing an amazing job. I wouldn't have been able to do any of this without his incredible help. So
thank you, Bashir.
Then we have so Derek also has been heading. He's been the chairman of the Marketing Association. He's done all sorts of phenomenal stuff. If you really were in marketing, you would have seen, or you worked in Air Canada, you would have seen his name umpteen times, the type of things he's done there. Then we have Carole disappeared. So Carole Piovesan is a partner in the law firm and has been involved heavily in the privacy area. And you will start to see that. Her background is on our website, so I won't kind of take up time. Then we've got Dr. Ann Cavoukian. Those of you who know her, don't know her, she was the former privacy commissioner in Ontario, and she's had, her and Sylvia have had tremendous amount of input into the GDPR. So privacy by design is something that she's, I guess, is part of her. So that's why John Ruffalo was talking about, we've heard them say. So why don't I kick off the question? I can't see you at the moment, Carole, but hopefully you can hear. Derek, one of the questions they want to start off with is really privacy versus security, and as being the big challenge. In fact, you can even comment on the study that just came out a few days ago, that 80% of the hacks and security problems that have happen with companies that have very poor privacy practices, right? So
they are definitely related, Bashir. So I see privacy and security being the front of the hand and the back of the hand. One can't move without the other moving with it. In order to develop a sound privacy program, security is a key part of it. Because in today's world, with the legislation moving the way it is, I truly believe that if you're going to collect data and you don't protect it, the damage to your brand, both reputation and even financially in terms of fines, is just going to be far too great. The fines are one thing, and they kind of scare the risk management model into kicking in,
right.
And action being taken against particular budgets. But I think more important, and the thing that we're beginning to realize with all the breaches that are happening, is that these breaches are expensive to a brand. They really cost in terms of brand reputation. We spend billions to build brands, and a breach can take it to its knees very quickly. So I think privacy and I think you and I have used the term, they're the opposite sides of the same coin.
That's absolutely right. And I know you're there, but you muted yourself. You want to take a crack at that? I think there's some feedback, but you heard the question, right?
Oh, I don't know where this is.
We can hear you, but there's a feedback. So maybe you got some speaker on or something?
No.
Whoa.
Oh, I'm so sorry. I'm getting feedback from you as well.
Are you on YouTube also, or just on one?
I'm on my iPad.
Yeah, so there's a feedback coming through. So there's something else on. If you got a headphone, you use that problem will go away. So while you're sorting, where's Carole? Carole, are you there? You were there a second ago. I'm not sure what happened here.
Yeah, I think
Oh,
there she is.
Perfect. Okay. Carole, the question was, the last few, and we'll get to end when get the mic going, is that, there's been a significant amount of data breaches occurring, and the report now says 80% of them are because of poor privacy practices, right? And we have already saying the data, privacy and security are really flip side of the other coin.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, that's absolutely right. So we had new regulation come into bear in Canada on November 1st, 2018. And that regulation really set in place definitions around what are security safeguards, what are the consequences of failing to comply with security safeguards, the importance of documenting any breach. What is very poorly understood is what is a breach of a security safeguard. So the assumption, because this is what we hear in the news, is that a breach that is reportable, no, let me take that back. A breach that should be documented is something that involves 15 million records of, health information. Not so. A breach can be a much, much smaller violation. So anything that involves the unauthorized access of somebody's personal information constitutes a breach that should be documented. It doesn't have to be reported, but it has to be documented. And there are practices around how you properly document. And then when it rises to the level that it should either be reported to an individual or to the or to the privacy commissioner. And because there is not, we're still getting to the point where we're understanding what is a breach, how does it occur, what does it, what do we do when it happens? Because of this, we see that that companies are like slowly getting there, but they're not quite there. Every day, though, we're hearing about these massive, massive breaches and the huge reputational hit that companies face. Not to mention, so you've got a hit on brand, you've got an impact by increasing class action lawsuits, even in Canada. And then you have regulatory investigations that are launched across Canada in particular, not to mention what happens around the world. So my big urge, you're absolutely right, security is critical. Security attacks on infrastructure, security infrastructure are increasing. The scope and breadth of breaches are increasing. And companies from a governance perspective are slow to catch up, but we're seeing it happen a lot faster now. And actually COVID is a bit of a catalyst. There was a recent article, I just read it yesterday actually, that said, we used to believe that nobody cared about their privacy, but these days in a COVID world where there have been a lot of attacks on health institutions in particular, people are starting to prioritize privacy and security over everything else.
Fantastic, that's good. Ann, are you there?
Absolutely, I am here, and I
fantastic.
sincerely apologize that you can't see me, especially because I really fixed up my hair this morning, and I looked really good. So you're just going to have to imagine how I look and just listen to me. So sorry.
No, don't worry.
Let me make it clear. Concern for privacy is at an all-time high. As Carole was referencing, COVID has just added to it. But even for the last 2 years, privacy concern has been at the 90 percentile. I've been in this business well over 20 years. I have never seen concern for privacy consistently. 90% of those surveyed very concerned about their privacy. 92% concerned about loss of control over their personal information. So let's make it clear. It's nonsense that people don't care about privacy. The concern, though, is how can we expect people to protect their own privacy? It's absurd to think that they're going to wade through all of the terms of service and all of the legalese in the privacy policy to find the darn opt-out box that says, do not use my information for any other purpose other than the intended primary purpose of the data collection. It's nonsense. Nobody has time to do that. But that doesn't mean they don't care about privacy. They care deeply. What we have to insist upon is increasingly making privacy the default setting, meaning you don't have to ask for privacy. We give it to you automatically. It's embedded into all of our operations by design. We can only use your personal information for the intended primary purpose of the data collection. And if we want to use it for a secondary use down the line, we have to come back to you and obtain your personal consent, your positive consent for that. And this is such a game changer. Companies that do this, and these are companies that have been certified for privacy by design, which, as you know, is something I created a long time ago. Companies that do this have come back to me and said, this builds trust like no other. There is such a trust deficit right now. By doing this and making privacy the default setting, you build trusted business relationships, which are huge because they're lacking right now. And what this does is it builds such confidence, and it gives the companies a competitive advantage over the other guys because they've built trust into their operations. And they've told me that when they do go back, if there's a secondary use, and ask customers for their consent for the secondary use, they always get it because they built trust. So let me talk a little bit about trust, or the lack of trust. There's such a huge trust deficit right now. COVID has just enhanced it, but this is across the board. The concern for surveillance and the tracking of one's activities is off the scale. I've developed a new, actually it's a new course I'm offering in the fall called Trust by Design, because what we need now is not just privacy by design, but how do you build trust by adding, competency, privacy, transparency. There's so much you need to do to convince customers that, in fact, they can trust the business operations with these companies. And if you don't do that, you're going to lose customers, and you're going to lose any belief in your operations. Any trust is just evaporating. So increasingly, I'm focusing on that. And the old notion, I say old because, I created Privacy by Design over 20 years ago. And one of the essential foundational principles is you must have both privacy and security. Get rid of the zero-sum mindset. Zero-sum is still so prevalent. It just means you can only have privacy versus security, or business interests versus privacy. And it's never privacy that wins in these, nor should it be. But it sure as hell can't lose out to other interests. And in fact, it's foolish to think that you benefit by putting one versus the other. So if you abandon zero-sum and embrace positive-sum, which just means privacy and security, privacy and business interests, privacy and marketing. I always tell companies, privacy is not anti-marketing, it's pro-choice. Give the individual, the customer, an opportunity to make a choice. In Canada, the Canadian Marketing Association always invites me to give a keynote at their annual marketing conference. And I always start by saying, I know I'm the least popular speaker here today. And fortunately they laugh, but then they say, yeah, but we know we got to listen to what you're saying. So I try to present privacy as a positive, not something you have to fear or walk away from, but do both. Get rid of the zero-sum mindset. Anatole Rappaport, who created game theory, the mother or father of zero-sum, etc. When I was a graduate student at the University of Toronto, he was a professor there, and I just fawned over him. He was amazing. And I always used to say to him, Professor Rappaport, why do people embrace zero-sum? I loved positive-sum because I'm a win-win kind of person. And I said, why? The advantages to positive-sum are far greater. And he said to me, Anne, the reason people embrace zero-sum, it's a lazy man's way out. In the short term, it's much easier to do zero-sum, but in the long term, it'll come back to bite you. So let me end on that note. I probably exceeded how much time I'm supposed to speak. Thank you very much, Bashir.
No problem, thanks. So here's that leads into a couple of questions that I have, and there are a few popping in here from the audience. Is that one is where you talked about, and Carole and Derek, this will be interesting for you as well, is the fact that we've got PIPEDA regulations which are totally out of whack. I mean, in terms of out of date is what I should say. Not that it's bad. And we know that if you go against GDPR, and that's one. The second question I have is that if you're a chief privacy officer in a company, they report to the legal counsel in most part, right? Or certainly in that different area. And you got a chief information security officer who's reporting to a CIO. And I mean, how does it work? These two, in most companies, at least I've seen, don't even talk to each other. And we know that you have a significant problem. And so we are not even structured correctly. What do you like? Carole, go for it.
Yeah.
And then.
It's a great question, and it's a question we get all the time. So let me just start with a bit of background about my firm. So we're a firm, we're relatively new in construct, and we focus on data law and AI risk management. And this is important to answer your question. So data law, we sort of define as privacy, cybersecurity, data governance, any type of movement or access of data in any sector. And then AI risk management is an example of a data-rich technology. It's a use. And so the way we approach the privacy and governance regime is with the AI, sort of the end use in mind, because it matters. Because AI, as I said, is a data-rich technology, and a key principle of under PIPED of privacy law across the board is data minimization. And it's interesting that the Privacy Commissioner back in February, I believe, hosted consultations where he asked us about this. Like, how do we rectify data minimization as an important principle, and it is, with artificial intelligence, which is a data-rich technology, which it is. And so we were talking about what that looks like and how has data minimization been approached from different angles. But you need to have that lens in mind in order, in my view, to be a privacy officer of the future, because you need to understand where data is going and where it's being used and how you can use it in an effective manner. AI doesn't care about me as Carole. It cares about certain features that I have that are comparable with other certain features. So there are ways to use sort of, it's no longer personal information, but de-identify that. You've got to be careful with how you do it. Be very careful with the governance structure you have in place. Be careful with the technology and the technique you use, and then apply that data and the data set for the purposes of more sophisticated, predictive, and very valuable technology that will help our companies be competitive. So how do we get the two to talk together? The first thing is they actually have to understand each other. So we often say the innovation team needs to understand privacy, and the privacy team needs to understand innovation. And the more they talk together, and the earlier they talk together, the better off you are down the line. So when you're doing a data strategy, you're doing sort of a technology or an innovation plan, you bring your privacy officers there from the beginning so that they can have a say, they can get it in their mind what you're trying to do and achieve, and they can have a say in what is viable in the short term. And I'll give you, so I have an example right now. I'm working with a client that is exactly in this spot. They've got these amazing innovation ideas in mind, and they're really struggling from the privacy side. So I said to them, let me talk to your innovation team. Let me understand where they're going, and then let's roll this back and create a roadmap that bears that in mind, as opposed to being in a constant state of friction as you try to get from A to B. So my big recommendation is roll it back, understand the future. So what does it look like 5 years out? Bring your privacy people in right at the outset and start the conversation early on. So there are no big surprises, because I can tell you what happens with legal. I promise you this happens every time. It's about to go to market on Monday. Friday at 4 o'clock, you get it saying, you as the lawyer get it saying, hey, can you just sign this off and it's gonna go because we're launching Monday. And you have to be the unfortunate person to say, this is never gonna fly. You cannot do this. We gotta start again. So start early, make the conversation robust, innovation, and said it best, this is not a zero sum, this is a positive sum. So incorporate that thinking right from the outset, and you will have a much smoother ride.
And make sure all the stakeholders are involved, really.
Make sure the stakeholders are there. Be broad in your stakeholder analysis.
Absolutely. Thanks, that's good. Derek?
Yeah, one of the things I love about our discussions, Bashir, is during your days at Visa when you had a dotted line to the chairman of the board as the head of risk.
He was my boss.
And yeah, and I think privacy needs to be. If privacy reports to general counsel, it's excluded, and privacy and security don't arise together. In fact, the right hand never knows what the left hand's doing. And I think that the silos in business, it's a small factor, in my opinion, in privacy. It's a huge factor in the effectiveness of the business. So, reaching back to the CEO roundtable, it was mentioned that the damage that silos are doing in business, and privacy is no exception. The silos are really harming the ability of an organization to properly implement and actually execute privacy by design. Ann's principles are rock solid. They just are not applied in enough organizations. And I think that businesses have to start taking their privacy seriously, because then it will lead to good security and it will lead to fewer breaches. I think that the online criminals, we like to call them hackers, but I call them criminals.
They are.
They are organized.
Yeah.
They got a 10-year plan, we're reacting.
Absolutely.
And often not until we've had the breach. So unfortunately, that's too late, right?
You know, I think
you
the
mentioned,
culture.
you know,
go ahead.
yeah, you know, you mentioned you and Ann talked earlier about trust, and you know, I looked at this incident we recently had with Tim Hortons card. That's crazy that a major brand like that.
Yeah, exactly.
Would turn on GPS and follow you everywhere. That is insane. Like, who made that decision? Who disrespected the consumer to that level? Like that was like marketing wasn't in the room. They couldn't have been.
I think it's the culture.
You would never treat your customer that way.
You know, just before we Ann says it, what I want to tell you is culture. I've seen an example in a very large Canadian organization where we asked for some information, and it was easier for them to just give us the entire tape rather than to extract that piece of information. And I saw that in Vietnam. I'll talk about it in security. It was ridiculous. Not even outsourced. There was outsourced somewhere else. And they further.
Right.
So I think the culture of not thinking about it, silos create that, and not understanding it's a swift, quick thing. So, and go for it. You're going to throw some light on this.
Yeah, I mean, it drives me crazy that it's this, you know, the Tim Hortons example that Derek mentioned. Ridiculous. They have, and they're experiencing a real backlash now because everyone has gone crazy about, are you kidding me? You're tracking me because I have a standing order every morning that I come in and pick up my coffee and donut or whatever they get. And now people are stopping doing that. So now Tim Hortons is experiencing the backlash, which always arises when there are these ridiculous security-related issues that arise. And, you know, this happens across the board. Last year at Cadillac Fairview Mall, it turns out people who went to their mall in Alberta and, you know, queried, where's the store? And their personal information, their facial image was being captured. And then when they found out about it, they were outraged. And they said, okay, we're out of here. So really, Cadillac Fairview, do you not want people to shop at your mall? And hundreds of them filed complaints with the Federal Privacy Commissioner. And so Cadillac Fairview had to shut it down until the investigation is complete. It's so short-sighted because companies just don't think about this. And that's the problem. But what I want to make it clear, I know it may seem overwhelming and that the odds are just so much against privacy and security and, you know, maybe we have to give it up. Never, ever go there. I tweet every morning. I have quite a large Twitter following. And invariably, one or two people will tweet back and say, you know, lady, give it up. That ship has sailed. Privacy is dead. And I tweet to them and I say, are you kidding me? Get another friggin' ship. You don't give up on privacy just because the odds are low. Are you kidding me? Do you know, I mean, this is an unrelated example. My parents barely escaped the Armenian genocide. They were scheduled to be killed the next day. And through the brilliance of my grandfather, they escaped. I wouldn't be here if he hadn't exercised his amazing talent. The odds of him succeeding and freeing his family were remote. Absolutely not. He should have just given up, but he didn't give up. And that's why I'm telling people now, you don't give up on privacy and security. These form the foundation of our freedom. You do not give up. You educate, and you also teach companies that it is in their advantage. They gain a competitive advantage by strengthening privacy and security. Their customers will thank them for it, and they will preserve their loyalty. You don't give up just because the odds are low.
Yeah, that's true. By the way, there's a question here that says, is this part of Castle?
No, Castle's completely different. Castle's designed to reduce spam.
Spam is okay.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
Victor, you get
Castle's less a privacy issue. Yeah.
Right, Victor, you got your answer. It's short and sweet that Castle is really Canadian anti-spam legislation.
But Bashir,
go ahead.
Bashir, tell them that if they follow privacy by design, and as you know, privacy by design is now part of the GDPR in the European Union, and specifically privacy as the default specifically has been identified. And now I think you're going to start seeing consideration of this in the United States, where they're exploring possible federal legislation, etc., now that the Privacy Shield has died. So I think you're going to see additional focus on privacy by design because of the benefits it will give you as a company, as well as to your customers, of course. We have to make this a win-win. It can't just be the company wins and the customers lose. If you have that, then you're going to lose your customers as well. Right. So let's get past that mindset.
I just want to add something to the Castle question and just situate it in context. So you may recall back in March 2019, May 2019, our federal government released a digital charter. And the digital charter, I was involved in that process and consulting with Canadians to inform the digital charter on behalf of the government. And what it does is articulate 10 principles. And certainly we can debate the usefulness of the charter in the end. But if you go to some of the principles, so the charter was released at the same time as a white paper on PIPEDA reform. And when you read the documents together, what you can see is that the government is really thinking about and struggling with, as they should, because they've gotten a lot of consultation and feedback on this, with how do people retain control over information that's about them. So this is to Ann's point. If where there's an element of consent, or where your consent is the default, there is somebody saying, yes, I agree. Now, there's a whole discussion about how do you get informed consent and how much investment does the person have to make in order to just get through a simple app registration. But really, there's a question around control there. So under the digital charter, we had issues around principles on interoperability, on control, on portability of your data. So can you move it from one system to another? Do the systems work together? The question around Castle, there is a component there too that says you get to control how much information or what kind of marketing information comes your way. So when you think about, I always say, go back to first principles. Don't mechanically comply. That is extremely boring and actually not helpful. But more importantly, it's extremely boring. Go back to first principles. What are you trying to achieve and why? What is it that you are trying to do and why? What is the relationship you want to have with your customers and why? When I'm asked, how do we bridge trust? Trust is not a matter of compliance. So my legal answer is, say what you're going to do and do what you say. And if you do that, you are in a great position to have a trusting relationship with your customers. If you go back to first principles, what are we trying to do for our customers? Who are we and why are we that? Then that's a great starting point to get you to that trust category that allows you to have more of a symbiotic relationship and a great competitive advantage.
So this is fantastic from what you said. So here's what I think what he's asking now, and I'm thinking further, is that if you don't get an approval for Castle, right, to send, you send somebody an email, you got information, does it require me to delete that information? Because you may still abuse it. Just because I don't send somebody an email or spam, I can still abuse that information in many different ways, right? We know that when I get a call for duct cleaning from overseas, how the heck did they get that information? Right?
Drives me crazy. I get it all the time.
Exactly. So how did they get the information? See, so the question is, can this not be tied into the PIPEDA type thing where it says, by the way, if you declined the permission, even if it's a specific use, you have to delete that information.
So I just want to make one quick point there, and then I'll turn it over to my panelists. But I think that's exactly the point of understanding what is your culture? Who are you? So is there a matter of compliance that you have to? Will somebody check? And if you don't, they'll slap your hand? Answer is no. But if you think about what are those principles that you are holding yourself to, and what is the type of ethos you want about yourself in the world? Who is the company you want to be, and what are you striving to become? If you put that in place in a thoughtful sort of cultural, principled, value-based manner, you actually are in a much better position, from my perspective, not only from reputational defensibility, but depending on circumstances, it could even rise to legal defensibility.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I just onboarded a client, and I literally said this to the entire team.
You're cutting out.
Last Friday. I said to them, instead of calling me when you have an issue around privacy and what you should and shouldn't do, just ask yourself, what would your customer like you to do?
Yes.
And if you started from there, you're probably going to get privacy right. If you always go back to what would my customer like me to do, really, and stop kidding yourself. And you know, the head of the group said, you know, that is something that we hadn't even thought of. And I said, you know, all good privacy is driven by taking care of the individual at the other end.
Yeah.
And GDPR has set us on a trail of exactly that. I mean, using Ann's privacy by design as a foundation, not just what you mentioned earlier, Ann, but transparency,
Yes.
and purpose limitations and data minimization, which the CEO group talked about. Those are all very important principles that are built into GDPR. And I think that the rest of the world is adopting GDPR, like we're seeing Brazil, we're seeing
Yes.
all sorts of countries adopt a very similar stance. And by the time the second piece of the CCPA comes in the referendum this fall, you're going to see that California is going to be very GDPR-like.
Yes, I totally agree. You know, what drives me crazy is, and Derek, everything you said, I totally agree with. What bothers me with Canada is we have not upgraded our PIPEDA, our federal private sector legislation, for years, despite repeated calls to do that by our federal privacy commissioner, Daniel Terrien. For like 4 years, he's been pressing them to upgrade ever since they included our privacy by design, the GDPR. You know, he went to the federal government and said, please, we need to upgrade PIPEDA. It's so dated, and we need to add privacy by design into it because it was, after all, created by a Canadian, Ann Cavoukian. It's been included in the GDPR. We don't have it. Trudeau has done nothing. And I am appalled by this because it's not enough. So PIPEDA, telling people to go there, you know, the federal commissioner found Facebook in violation of PIPEDA with the whole Cambridge Analytica thing. And he said they had to do this and this. What did Facebook do? They thumbed their nose at him because he doesn't have the authority to do anything. And Facebook said, well, we don't agree. And we're just going to, you know, so finally, thank God, the commissioner took them to court and it's in the courts now. But that's a very difficult thing to do. It's very expensive and it's not part of the law. So I don't refer people to PIPEDA. I refer people to, like you said, Derek, think about what your customers would like for privacy. Think about how to embed it into the design of your operations. Forget about PIPEDA, just embed it into the design, bake it into your code.
Right. Don't paint it on.
Compliance is completely the minimum standard. I mean,
Yes.
compliance is the minimum. I think we need to, as a business, if we care about our business, we need to go way past compliance.
Right.
Totally.
Absolutely. So then that actually begs a very interesting question for all of you guys. Is that one of the problems that getting identified is a question from a gentleman called Christian as well, which makes sense. That at the end of the day, no matter how many laws we have, what we do, of course, we talk about organization culture. Does it not come to also educating the individual? To stop giving away your information and hold people accountable. Like, how did Tim Hortons get all this thing? How come nobody knew about what the heck Tim Hortons was doing? And when the Ian McLeod was the person, I think, who exposed it, and then we picked it up. And I was happy to see yesterday when I tried to order some donuts, it says, do you want me to track you all the time or just track you for this transaction? That's a change. And I'm glad we did our small part in that. So the question becomes, if we can educate, so how would you go about trying to educate the people? And corporations as well, Corner Suite, the people are doing it, but public at large.
I think that's happening. There's an awakening around privacy because of the massive amount of abuse of privacy by businesses in their everyday actions. I think awareness of things like Tim Hortons and Cambridge Analytica. You did what with my data? You used it against me? Like that's none of your business. That's my
Yes.
business. Like when I go on vacation to Morocco, as I think James McLeod was his name.
Yes.
I
James
think,
McLeod, yeah.
Yeah, I think that when James was shocked when he looked through the documents and he realized that they tracked him for the 2 weeks he was in Morocco.
Oh,
And
appalling.
it's like that's none of Tim Horton's business. Now, tracking me when I come in and get a coffee, I would expect that out of a loyalty app. But they went too far. But in terms of the privacy commissioner opening a investigation, I chuckled because I said, "And what are you going to do? You're going to publicly shame them?" And I think that that's part of it, Bashir.
Yeah.
Making like that public shaming would make people aware, like, oh, that companies do that. That's not okay with me. So I think it's getting there. And I think that, and again, I have to credit Ann's work in Privacy by Design and GDPR, the European Union's stick-to-itiveness to come to a conclusion to put GDPR in place. That was a lot of work across the 29 countries. That was quite a
Absolutely.
Carole,
I
you want
couldn't
to?
agree with
Yeah,
you.
absolutely no.
on protecting the individual's rights, right?
Yeah.
Carole, you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, I want to answer the question about educating the public in 4 parts, or with 4 different responses. So the first is increasingly companies are required to be very transparent about what their practices are. It's not enough because where they are being transparent is in a privacy policy that nobody reads. But the push is to become even clearer. And do that in a way that aligns with the other principles of privacy law, which include, for instance, minimization, limitation of period, and purpose-driven collection and use. So there needs to be, I need to know that when I give up my data, anything that is really beyond the reasonable expectation of what you would do with my data is brought clearly to my attention, and that I am allowed to opt out of that if I don't want it. So the reason in part that Cambridge Analytica was so scandalous was because we were trying to engage in fun social interactions, which is what we thought the Facebook platform was there for. And all of a sudden we found out, no, the data was being repurposed, and then ultimately used in sort of political manipulation for elections. Like that is not at all what I expected my data to be used for. I would have never turned my mind to that. So it is not at all fair for me I can't consent on that. Like I can't, even if I give it to you, I have no idea what you're doing with it because I would have never reasonably expected that. So that's number 1. Number 2, we do need to update our laws. We need to have clear laws. GDPR has set the standard. And I think it's not a point that needs to be repeated too often because I think it's fairly accepted. We need to update and modernize our laws. And we like to talk about it and not do anything. We have
Carole,
to do it.
here
I
in
agree.
Canada.
That's right.
We're going to talk it to death.
Well, let's hope we actually do it. The third is, I think we actually start to need, we have to start to educate about data and digital rights much earlier. So we're seeing in schools right now, I have 1 school-age child and 1 that's a little bit too young, but we're seeing, financial literacy coming into the schools, and we need to do the same with data literacy. We absolutely need to do that because data is an important asset and it is extremely valuable, and it's also something that we have and can control, and it's little pieces of us. So we need to do that as a third. And then the final is we need to accept and embrace the privacy market. So we are seeing increasing number of companies coming up with privacy as a competitive advantage, and they are building that draws very heavily from Ann's Privacy by Design. So again, we can credit Ann for that. They are using privacy as an advantage to reach out, just like ESG principles came out with social and environmental and governance structures. We're seeing privacy in the same light. And I think that's really important. We're seeing it so much so that in the competition and antitrust world, competition here, antitrust in the US, that it is increasingly being considered as an element for analysis when you're looking at the sort of monopolistic behavior of firms and companies as they grow. So data as an asset that allows them to become more monopolistic. So you can see that this is, you know, an increasing market. I think we should embrace that market, particularly as Canadians and Canadian companies. We have a great position to start from in order to advance our companies that are privacy by design certified and that stick to that certification.
Fantastic. We've got 7 minutes left. There's a couple more questions. Do you want to add anything to what was not said?
Bashir, if I could just add,
Yeah.
we haven't talked about the right to be forgotten yet. And I just think this is so critical. First of all, to Derek's point, more people now understand about the issue about privacy in terms of the public than ever before. I do a lot of public speaking. In the past, I'd have to start by explaining why I thought they should care about privacy. I don't have to do that anymore. They are there. They tell me, what do I do to protect my privacy? What do I do not to have my personal information captured forever? And so they might not use the language of right to be forgotten, but that's what they mean. They don't want their personal information captured and retained forever. It's absurd. And getting that across to companies is a very, very important point. So understanding of privacy issues is paramount now. We don't have to explain it. They get it. They want it fixed. How do we do that? And the one thing I just want to pass on to companies, because they rarely do it. They rarely, I talk about strong encryption, etc. In terms of data at rest, once you've obtained the necessary functionality from the data you've collected, what do you do with it? Ideally, they should just delete the data because it's already been used. They rarely do that, Bashir. So then I say as a fallback, okay, you're not going to delete it. You want to retain it. Encrypt all data at rest. At the very least, by encrypting data at rest, you're not a magnet to the hackers. The hackers could probably break into the code, but they can't be bothered because there are much easier things to break into, other magnets. So at the very least, do that, encrypt data at rest, and literally think about the right to be forgotten and that people do not want their data captured and retained forever.
You know,
the new Quebec law is onto this.
Which we're gonna talk about that in the next session.
Yeah, Patrick's going to talk about that.
Right. So here the very quick thing, because what you talked about here, about who owns the data, because that's the question you just talked about. One of the problems that I experienced from as far back from the airline days of Air Canada, and question was when you make a reservation, you went through different systems. You had American Airlines Sabre. We had our system, which was Reservec, then became Gemini, it became Galileo. And question is, you go through your travel agency to make a booking, goes to the airline system, to the other airlines you're now going to be, changing flights on. Who owns the data? And American Airlines position was, no, we own it. We said, no, you don't own the data. But it was big, and there was never an answer to this. So it opened up, this question was, please book it on my system, because if you come through me, then it's mine. Then I am only giving you this portion, but it's my data. And it's ridiculous, but that's kind of what happened, which then leads into the question what Leon's asked, which is actually correct, is that we're talking about a lot of technology has been talked about, we put technology in the front, but really, isn't it about the privacy, but where the problems are happening are the lack of ethics, because they should come together, right?
Yeah, for sure.
Of course, absolutely.
Yeah, for sure.
And ethics now is beginning to truly be focused on in terms of privacy and many other areas. And the need, especially with AI coming, you have to address ethical issues of that. There is absolutely no doubt. So I think increasingly you're going to see ethics morph into the privacy area. But I want to be clear. I think ethics has always been part of privacy, but we've never addressed it that way.
That's right.
Going back to the Code of Fair Information Practices, 1980, I mean, purpose specification, use limitation, all of that, very, very important. But the issue of who owns the data, this is going to be coming up more and more. And I just want to tell you, I'm working with Microsoft on something that they've developed called decentralized identity, where ownership and control of the data reside with the individual, the data subject. I always tell people, privacy is all about control. The individual has to be able to retain control fully over their personal information. That's what privacy is about. So I applaud Microsoft for developing this decentralized identity area, and we're gonna really grow this big time. Privacy and control, ownership of control residing with the individual.
Love it. I think we've been in a mode You know, when it comes to ethics, there's a fundamental question that technology allows us to, but should we?
Yeah.
Yes.
Right. And we've made our decisions out of what will technology allow us to do, rather than whether or not we should do that. And
Yes.
and again, I circle back to the customer. You know, I'm from a marketing background, and the customers are always out front.
Yeah.
As an ad agency, we represented the customer to our clients, and you know, we often fight for the rights of the client, and privacy has excluded that, unfortunately, and we're beginning to put that in now and be more awake to it. So I love that we're having these conversations, and God bless you. It's a lot to do with your pioneering work, and thank you.
Yes, yes. So what
Thank
we'll
you
do,
very
because
much.
we've got 3 minutes left, what we'll do, by the way, there are plenty of questions come across. As I said before, we're going to have one-on-one with each of you,
Great.
which could be almost an hour to really answer and go deep dive.
Sure.
Because, but one of the things, if you can take 1 minute each to say, what keeps you awake at night in this area of privacy?
So maybe I'll launch, because my answer actually relates to the previous question and to one of the comments in the box. I think about how data will be used. I appreciate the profound power of artificial intelligence and the power of predictive technologies. So when I think about what keeps me up at night, what keeps me up at night is really the use cases, and how will it be used in a manner that subverts our values and harms our systems, our sort of social democratic systems. Personally, my firm focuses a lot on this. So we've been developing tools around AI risk management. And I think it's critical to infuse questions around appropriate uses and thoughtful uses in your technology and in your innovation agenda.
Fantastic. Anne, you want to take a quick...
Sure, I agree with everything Carole said, but my biggest fear is that people are going to give up on privacy. They're going to think that it's simply no longer possible to protect your privacy because there's so much tracking and surveillance going out there by both private sector and government. Do not forget government. They're worse than the private sector in terms of all of the data that come under their control. So that's what concerns me. And I want to keep getting the messaging out. No, you never give up on privacy. We can always strengthen our privacy and security. We have to have this. This forms the foundation of our freedom. Without freedom, life to me isn't worth living. So that's what I'll leave with you. And Bashir, again, my apologies for not giving you video. I look so good. I feel terrible.
I promise you, we will get you on yourself to do this, because I think what has happened, there are so many questions, and I'm just telling them that, look, we're going to answer all of your questions. One came about the free stuff that we get free this, and people click and give all that information away. So we'll answer all that. Derek, you want to add before we...
Yeah, what keeps me up is really the lack of action in terms of the law. I think there can only be a couple things going on with this government. One, they're serving two masters. So GDPR served one master. It protected their citizens' data, period. I believe our government is actually torn between protecting our data and making it convenient for business. And you know what? The fact is, given the structure and the way we've gone about using people's data, we need some correction. It is going to be painful for business. They're going to have to put in change, and we all hate change. But our government has to protect, they've got to prioritize. And then the second thing I think that is at work is that we're looking for perfection rather than progress. And I truly believe that if we sit, given what we folks at ISCD policy, and they know what they're doing, they could put a law in today without public consultation that would get most of it right. So it's not that we don't know what to do, we just don't have any political will to do it. And that keeps me up at night.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, guys. There's a question that we will address in the interview, whatever we do later, which is the Egypt launched GDPR type stuff, but removed the legitimate business reason out of it. Which means if you're
It's ridiculous.
Facebook or your Google, you got trouble, right? So, and maybe they've done it by design to then force the issue.
Actually, 90% of businesses, 90% of the businesses in GDPR are using legitimate interest as their lawful basis.
Right.
Yes.
But to exclude it from the law is just insane.
It's absurd.
Maybe they should everybody except Facebook, and you would be okay. but we will address that issue. But Dr. Ann Cavoukian, fantastic. I apologize we couldn't see your beautiful hairdo that you got done, but you will get a chance. Carole, absolutely fantastic thoughts that you expressed, which was very helpful. And Derek, and again, enjoy your birthday. You're going to be back up before too long. So thank you, guys. We are recording this, and you will get a chance to hear a lot of the very important things that Carole, Ann, and Derek actually talked about. And we will answer your questions. Don't worry. I promise you.
Thank you, Bashir.
Pleasure. Thanks.
Thank you.
I really appreciate that.
Bye-bye. Thank you.
Thanks.